Welcome to the District Architecture Center and another installment of our video series on the giants of Washington architecture. This is a series about architects that have really made a difference here in DC. And we use the term giants because it refers to a quote by Sir Isaac Newton, "If I have seen further, it is because I am standing on the shoulders of giants." And I'm so excited to introduce you to one of our giants, Hany Hassan. Welcome, Hany.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
So, Hany, you grew up in Cairo, and your father was a professor of engineering at the university there?
Yes, he was the professor of engineering, and he was the dean of the school. I learned from a lot of people, also by observation, not necessarily one-on-one per se.
Right.
Starting with my father being my biggest idol. And I know the word mentoring means a lot because it relates mostly to the professional activity and the professional experience, but also those mentors or those idols. You learn a lot from them, and right. It's just that my father happened to be the symbol of humility and kindness. And because of that, everybody loved him. So I always looked at him, how this amazing man is kind of loved by everybody, and this is the thing that I looked up to. It's almost like the power of nice. But I also learned from observing some of Otto Egger's drawings and sketches, original sketches, I must say, that were framed throughout our office. So, and there was one of them was practically sitting on top of my desk. So above my drafting table was a drawing of the National Gallery of Art.
Oh, wow.
So every day I came to work, I just observed this amazing drawing among others. So that was all in New York. Mm-hmm. And I come here to Washington, D.C. And I would be absolutely fortunate to be able to actually work and touch this magnificent building that Otto Eggers and John Russell Pope designed. It's almost like a dream. It's something that I never, ever thought of, but this is how I started my career here in the United States, and that's how that serendipity kind of brought me here to be able to actually work on these buildings that I have admired for years. I draw to understand the building. And while I'm drawing the building, I began to sort of develop a certain connection there, almost as if it is my original design or my original building, and that also develops a connection with the original architect. And in so many ways, I become almost very protective to that existing building and have great respect for it, which enables me to do the right thing.
We've had so many great buildings here in Washington, the old post office building, the Carnegie building, the Union Station, all sorts of buildings that have these iconic structures. But I have one particular favorite that's in Antwerp, which is the Red Star Line building. And that's a building where people who were coming to the United States, that's where they left from. And do you want to talk about that process?
It started with one of Bob Bell's premier projects, which is Ellis Island. Was a very special project. That's a project that we received the presidential award for it. And in my mind, its importance is because it's the highest award in public buildings. And that's where the story started. So we were always connected with the subject of immigration in relationship to Ellis Island. So when the opportunity came up in Antwerp, particularly with the Red Star Line, we were very much in tune with that. And we pursued this international competition and we won. It's like any other project. We do the proper research and what it means, really beyond the structure itself. So you may see in some of my drawings is the whole concept of the journey of coming to the United States. So the first sketch I did was really a ship sailing and leaving Antwerp. It was not a building. It was just the whole experience. That it's very special and it's very personal to me, even though I didn't come to the United States on a ship. By comparison to Ellis Island here, these were three modest brick buildings. But the transformation that we have done there and the introduction of the observation tower to go up the building and experience the whole city and the water, and just have that whole idea of leaving home and being uprooted. It's an experience that maybe 3 million immigrants have embarked from that particular point to leave their land to come to another promised land, the United States. And one of the most touching images or photographs that led me to participate in this pursuit is some of the images of the younger children standing on the edge by the water, just wondering what they're thinking of going to this new land.
Well, I was there on July 4th, and climbing up to the tower and looking out at the ocean and thinking about all of those people who just were leaving everything behind, and the promise that they were going to. It was just, it's a really moving experience. The other story that you've told me that's really moving about another building that's not here in Washington is the Czech Embassy and the importance of the flag at the Czech Embassy. You want to tell that story?
Working with the State Department, particularly on embassies project, they really mean a lot because that is really the face of the United States abroad. Interestingly enough, this particular project is very special in a way because it's a 500-year-old structure. There was a combination of multiple buildings that became the embassy building itself. And on top of that hill is the Glorieta. And on top of the Glorieta was the American flag. And if you could imagine this picture, it was practically at the highest point of this particular site. During the communist influence there, that flag was always raised high above that horizon. I did not understand exactly how important that was, not only to the American population, but was also to people who actually natives from Prague. When I met with them there and we had that discussion and I shared with them the drawings and sketches that I have done for that building and that site, and that particular subject came up, then I understood fully what it truly meant.
In Prague and maybe in Antwerp too, but in other cities around the world, historic buildings and modern buildings are combined. We don't necessarily do that in Washington. We tend to keep them as sort of pristine objects. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Or disagree with me?
Slightly. I think it takes a lot of research, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of conviction to be able to really do the right thing, to be able to convince people to make that change. So in so many ways, it's okay to be protective to those iconic landmarks that we have. They are really very precious to us because the history of the United States is relatively much younger than other places in the world. And perhaps because of that, it's even more precious because it's a younger history and there is less of it. So maybe you become maybe more protective. But every building has its own life. I think it is really not appropriate to keep the building stagnant in a way and not given the opportunity to have that sense of continuum, whether it's the same use or a new use that gives it a new life. And we have done that here in so many buildings in the right way. The Carnegie Library is a perfect example of that. We certainly give it new life. It's no longer a library per se, but it's accommodating two tenants, two important tenants, very, very different program. We pretty much touched every square inch of that building, and the building endured a lot of deterioration through the years since it was built in 1902. It's very, very special for not only for Andrew Carnegie, but also very important for the city because it was free. It was a free library. What is important now in this particular renovation and adaptive reuse, it's a place that is open to the public. I always appreciated that building in so many ways because if you look at it today, it's really a gem and in the midst of that green oasis, surrounded by mostly glass buildings. So it makes it even more unique and more special. And one of the things that I always appreciated about that building is the clarity of the functions within that you're able to read on the outside. You can read where the reading rooms are. You could read where the main entrance is. You could read where the book stacks are. Right. And we pretty much have maintained that, but what we have done is that we've revealed all that. So the minute you walk into the building, you really understand it holistically, how it was organized and how it is to function in a different phase of its life.
What would you like to see happen in Washington?
I would like to see the ability to be less rigid and perhaps more open-minded to change and growth and evolution. Not in a way that will destroy the character of the city, but in a way that will enhance it. And I say that this happens with a lot of research, understanding the quality of what we're working with. There's a lot of examples of being able to expand the city in a way that is appropriate, that is contemporary, and up to today's standards. And I find that that marriage between the two sort of emphasized that, because you appreciate it more when you see the contrast between these various elements.
So you do these very meticulous renovations and restorations, and you do all this research, and you do just detailed sketches. And now the thing you're doing is these sculptures that are meant to disappear. Tell me, is it just the pressure of all this research? You wanted something as an antidote? So tell us about your garden sculpture.
Well, there's more to it. It's really part of being grounded and part of being connected with nature. And this is an inspiration that I always had, which is really being able to work with natural material and create a natural sculpture that it has its own life, that is ephemeral, and it's meant to disappear. It's almost like a Mandela of sort. It also taught me not to get attached. It's a way of letting go. And sometimes, if I can relate this to architecture, sometimes we get so attached to a building that, say, we designed, or a building that somebody else designed, that it's a historic building, and we become very much set on just keeping it the way it is and never allowing anything to happen to it in terms of growth, in terms of expansion, in terms of giving it a new life. And when we begin to kind of resist that. So what was amazing about this particular sculpture, first of all, it was very extensive. That went around the entire property, and it took like about a couple of years of continuous building. And it always changed through the various seasons. Like when it rained, it looked very different, and when it snowed, just as well. And the more these branches kind of deteriorate, the more I feed them, and the more it continues that whole experience and that attachment, and being really grounded. And it was also a form of meditation for me.
Is it still existing?
No, it completely dissolved, which I never thought that it will dissolve completely, but it completely dissolved because of all the rain and and the snow and so on.
So you really had to let it go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Hany, for taking the time, and thank you all for joining us on this episode of The Giants of Washington Architecture.
My pleasure, Mary. Thank you.